Yeah.
This is a time of mystery and uncertainty. Take a breath. The veils of separation are parting, and the reality of interconnection is becoming apparent to everyone on Earth. We have needed this pause, perhaps even needed our isolation, to see how much we actually need one another. Now it is time to add our part. Bodhisattva deliberately turns towards suffering in order to serve and help those around in whatever they can. This is the test we have been waiting for. We know how to do this. It's time to renew your vow. Sit quietly again and ask your heart, what is my best intention, my most noble aspiration for this difficult time? Your heart will answer. Let this vow become your North Star. Whenever you feel lost, remember it, and it will remind you what matters. It is time to be the medicine, the uplifting music, the lamp in the darkness. Burst out with love. Be a carrier of hope. Trust your dignity and your goodness. Where others hoard, help. Where others deceive, stand up for truth. Where others are overwhelmed or uncaring, be kind and respectful. It is time to reimagine a new world, to envision sharing our common humanity. Remember, we are all in this together. And this is really what struck me in motivating this. Hello, Elizabeth.
Hi, everybody.
Hi.
Hi.
Hey, Elizabeth.
Hi.
Hey, good to see you, Dennis.
Yes,
Now,
good to see you.
Elizabeth, welcome. Do you know Greg Salyer?
Yes, I.
Good to see you again.
Good to see you too.
You know, Tara, a week ago when you and I first sat down and at your office up in Montrose, and we were talking about how essentially therapists specifically, but the rest of us generally, we're basically going to have to stay home and not have our clients and not have our workplaces, and things were going to be pretty different. And on that particular day, there were about 3,500 cases nationally of the coronavirus. A week later, we're at 85,000.
Yeah.
I'm just shocked by the numbers and the degree to which this has initiated a wake-up call. And I think that wake-up call, for me particularly, comes in the form of what are we talking about in terms of a new form of consciousness? The old form of consciousness that got us here, the one that said we lord over the earth, we are empowered, we are divinely authorized, I think we're getting pushback from nature and the earth in the form of this virus.
Yeah.
And it just seems to me that we really have to modify our stance. And so I reached out, and I reached out to those that I thought would be the best possible voice. There's Boris. Boris,
Hey.
welcome.
Hey, Boris.
Good evening.
All right.
Hey.
Wonderful. Well, now we have our full house.
Good.
Boris, do you know everybody here?
Hi, Boris. Dennis Slattery. I've not met you.
Next, let's see, you know Will, you know Tara.
I don't know if we've met. Have we met? Hi, I'm Tara.
Comes to
I've been to some Miss salons.
come to the Miss Salon. I met Boris. God, was it the summer, last summer?
A couple of summers ago.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And let's see. David Adricio is directly above you. Do you all have the same screen that I have?
No.
No.
I see a panel of 9.
I see a panel of 9. You're in the center is where you ought to be. You know, that's good. That works. You know, I like being at the periphery. Where
Well, I don't think I'm on the center on every screen.
and
No.
Selena.
Yes.
All right. David is a professor and director of the retreat at Pacifica, a very important person up there. He has done a myth salon. He was gracious enough to come all the way down here. Dennis teaches at Pacifica from a distance, but he comes out here. He lives in Texas. Who else? And you know Greg. Yes?
I don't think so.
Oh, Boris, you don't know Greg Salyer? What happened to him? Maybe his thing oh, you're there?
He's there. Yeah.
Okay. Greg Salyer is the president of the Philosophical Research Society over in Los Feliz. His thing seems to be running a little slow or something.
I'm in touch with that.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yes, I think we had a freeze. Okay. Okay.
You're good.
All right.
Nice little ritual of what everybody in the country is going through right now. Little quick checks and figurings out on Zoom. Everybody's doing it.
Well, and there's just so much that we have to be patient with, you know. What I would like to do is to start things. I would like to turn it over to Selena for a second and let her open it up with, she thought that first the phrase transforming consciousness. And I'd also like to give a nod to Vanessa Valdez, who many of you know, but she has a radio show called Transforming Consciousness. And as I was putting this thing together, I said, I've heard the words. And she's actually had both Greg and me on her radio show before. And I went, oh my God, that's where I've heard that. You know, it was a natural phrase, but in this particular time, it was the phrase that was most natural, that seemed most appropriate to our current moment. So I called Vanessa on Saturday night and I said, Vanessa, I got to talk this out with you because I don't want you to think I ripped off the name of your radio show. You know, and she said, she was just honored that I would have, you know, validated her right idea for transforming consciousness that she'd been doing for, I don't know, 3 years or something like that on Radio KPFK. And so she blessed it. She thought that was really a good thing. But it gave me a clean bill of health, you know, to go forward and use the words in such a way that I'm not saying, oh my God, I wish I had called her, because she's going to hear this word out there somewhere, and I'm going to be in the doghouse. And I can get myself in the doghouse very easily anyway, but I didn't need that. So anyway, with that in mind, Selena, why don't you, you know, talk to us for a bit. I am not going to monitor and mute and do all of that kind of stuff. I figure we are just people who can honor one another and listen and go with it. There is a thing on here about raising hands. I'm not quite sure how you do it, but if somebody wants to do something, let's see, how do you do it? No. Selena, how did you
I'd be surprised if that ended up being a problem.
Yeah, there's something you can do where you raise your hand, and I guess I'm the only.
If you hit the participants thing on the bottom of the screen, it'll put up where the chat shows up usually. the list of us, and at the bottom of that it says mute me or raise hand, and then the chat goes below that.
You all move.
Oh, great.
Um, I don't see anything about raising hand. I don't know. Let's not get all.
Yeah.
You want to raise? If you want to say something, just raise your hand. Everybody will see you. We all see one another.
Yeah.
Do we all have the 9-screen thing showing? Therefore, let's
6.
go for it. Let's see what happens.
Yeah.
On you, Selena.
Okay. So thank you, Dana, again for letting me do this. When Dana said the topic was going to be transforming consciousness, I went crazy because this is my essential nature and what I do for a living. What I'm passionate about every single day with every single one of my clients. Before, telemedicine was something that I really very seldomly did. But now I am doing it 8 hours a day, 4 days a week. So it's quite a change. It's quite a change from being in a practice to speaking to people, via technology, virtual technology. But I had an experience with a patient last week that was really unique, and that's what I really wanted to share with all of you. It was a fairly new client who came in to see me, very interesting young 32-year-old who wanted to transform her life. And so we've been working to make change. And so the last session that we had, we were working on some things, and I realized that she was really right for this spiritual type of technique that I do. And I decided I've never done this technique. It's a very complex technique. So I decided to do it virtually, even though I've never done anything like that virtually. But what happened was magic. As I was administering it, I could see her face, like in my phone, her phone was, held, a foot away from hers. And normally when I sit in front of people, I'm 4 to 6 feet away. So as I'm administering this spiritual technique, I could actually see the phone. My experience was it was acting as an emotional microscope, illuminating the process, because I'm never that close to people. So it felt like I was watching her psyche in real time. It was magical at that moment. I had never experienced anything like that. I never imagined that technology could take me to a place like that. So I was, pretty blown away. And when the technique was over and she opened her eyes, streams of tears of joy just, poured out of her. It was magical. I was changed and she was changed. And my realization from the experience was my phone had a new capacity, and that was transforming consciousness. And that's what really lit me up to ask Dana to start.
Thanks, Selena.
It's great.
All right. Thank you very
Very
much.
good.
Maybe Dennis or Will, either one, I brought up a couple pages of, I thought, perspectives that I thought I would really want to cover these. I've been just devastated by the statistics, and I didn't want this to turn into something of I'll call it a gripe session about, either politics or the phenomena that are going on, but more reflectively about who are we and what are we doing and how do we move forward, and what do we need to transform in order to become? How can we become agents of healing and process?
Dana, I'd like to respond. I'd like to respond to Selena's wonderful story. Thank you for telling us that. There is, there's a great deal of talk about how technology alienates us from embodied experience. And that certainly is true in some respects. But I think, Selena, what your story is showing us is that technology is also enabling. Even though we are physically distant, you were physically distant from your patient, your client. That I think one of the things that makes human beings unique is that we have the imaginal capacity to bridge the gap. And I'm not saying that we can dispense with the body. I would be the last person to say that. But that we can, because you have had so much experience with patients, in the same room, 4 to 6 feet away from them, you and your patient are able to imagine something like that, or in other words, I believe that our imagination is a tremendous capacity, and it's something that we need right now, in our response to coronavirus. And part of it is to take up questions of, if we cannot be physically proximal to one another, how can our imagination overcome that distance and still find a way for our souls to connect? Maybe put it that way. So just put that out there for discussion point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I just want to make a couple of comments. I think it's still in the field. Two sides that I'm working. One is, and I don't know if you can see this, this is Brooke Gladstone's The Trouble with Reality.
I teach
And I
that
think,
book.
pardon?
Sorry, I said I teach that book every year.
Oh, wonderful. I'm reading it, just finishing it up.
Yeah.
Her subtitle is A Rumination on Moral Panic in Our Time. And it's just a brilliant, it's a little book and it's a potent book. It's some 86 pages. And I want to look at the shadow side of where we are in order to continue with this kind of conversation. The second book is Jane Jacobs' Dark Age Ahead. Now this is 2004, and she's nailing it on the symptoms. The word virus is such an interesting metaphor because it has to do with infections and the way that they spread almost unconsciously, i.e. invisibly. Then the positive side, Patrick Mahaffey put me on to Pema Chodron's work, the Buddhist nun who founded the first monastery, I think in Nova Scotia, for Westerners, a Buddhist monastery. So I've been reading her for 10 years, and she has had a remarkable influence on me in shifting consciousness in ways that I wasn't even aware that I was conscious in particular ways. So I think both of those pieces, the shadow side and this shifting of consciousness, it feels like there's room for both of those in this discussion, wherever it leads.
If I can comment on that, one of the things that I always appreciate Dr. Tarnas for pointing out is the dual myth of Prometheus and Adam and Eve in the West. They're both these origin stories of knowledge. One represents a fall, and one represents a beginning of progress. And the point isn't to pick one or the other, but to recognize that both are concurrent, that there is a process of a kind of fall from some purity where we once were, and some sort of progress. And so I think that as you point to the kind of light and dark of this situation, to me, I don't think anybody would disagree, but it's such a clear both and, that we have to think about what we're losing. And, as you're who taught me Epic, and one of the things you taught me about Epic is that Epics are written when you need to gather up all the good stuff that might be lost and put it in a new form for a new era. And I think that's one of the things that we have to do right now. What's the stuff that's about to be lost? You know, not just business travel. What's the more important embodied physical stuff? And as we do shift this paradigm into, you know, towards the progress of more virtual and dematerialized exchanges, how do we keep the good stuff?
Yeah, good.
So I think I live sort of in that direction a little bit, and I love that, Selena, you're sharing the story of that transformational nature that is available with the experience and practice and tolerance. But I also know that what I've been hearing over this last week, for some people, I've heard these expressions of, I'm housebound and the people that I'm with don't want to hear me. They don't want to know how I feel. I got a couple of calls of, I am so angry at so many stupid people in the world making such bad choices that I feel bad because I'm starting to want them to die, right? And I think that, to speak to Will's piece and to Dennis's piece, that the shadow and being able to tolerate, as both as a therapist and just as a human, to say, tell me more about that shadow. Let's understand it. Let's love why it's here, is a big piece of the work that I'm doing, is witnessing and allowing and empathizing with and connecting with the darkness that comes up in this, with all the fear and anger and frustration. And I love that you referenced Pema Chodron, because in the training that I took with Donald Kalshed, he references her as well. And one of the pieces that he just uses with trauma treatment is, you know, that getting to the space of letting the heart break so that you can develop into the new, that it has somewhere to go, but that we have to lose something first.
That's right.
And
That's right.
so I think that's part of keeping the soul in the work, when we're shifting paradigms and shifting ways of connecting, that it needs to include that I can tolerate your pain, your shadow, your anger, your fear, without wanting to run away, without needing to get rid of you, without needing to destroy it or silence anything.
Yeah, nice. Yep.
We need to look at the shadow at a cultural level too. I mean, if you bring an archetypal perspective to what is happening right now, at least since the 2016 presidential election, and Dana, I'm not going to go down that road too far, but at least since then, we've had rhetoric about contagion and purity, and wanting to reestablish our inviolable self, our boundaries, by building walls. And so when you look at it archetypally, the coronavirus is almost too on the nose to be believed as an evocation or a manifestation of shadow in response to this desperation for purity and a fear of contagion.
Yeah.
I've gotten every time I see a commercial on CNN of one of the power washers washing the house siding right now, it feels like this weird hypnotic meditative image of the moment. This you know, washing of the walls kind of a thing. But one thing that, you know, as we start talking about the shadow of it, that's been really helpful for me in approaching this epistemologically, I guess, is the Wendy Doninger's whole implied spider approach, right? Like, I would like to point at a spider, but I never get to see the spider. And I know that the second you start pointing at one, you're a crack, but the web is quite clear. And there's a lot of web to point to right now. And from my point of view, it's not just web, it's also plots. So, you know, one of the things that, you know, I was looking at getting ready for this conversation is like, what plots are being furthered? Who cares why, how, what the spider is, if there's a spider at all, but what plots are being furthered? And to your point about how uncanny it is, it's uncanny how many of the biggest plots of our last, you know, several decades and even centuries and millennia, it's amazing how much the plots that we're in right now are being furthered by this.
Yeah.
taking of our privacies, more virtual exchanges, less material activity, rise of presidential powers, closing of borders, more protection, closing of supply chains, you know, on and on and on, you know, re-strengthening of, you know, the crown and Putin's power and anybody that wants to be reelected. Like, there's so many narratives, even liberal agendas coming in at the same time, right? Universal basic income, healthcare, deference of loans, these types of things. It's somehow or another, it's like all these major plots, which don't even seem like they're plots of the same, you know, sides, you might say, all seem furthered by what's going on. And that's got my bells going.
Mm-hmm.
I'm still with Tara's comments about Pema Chodron and Don Kalshed and letting the heart break. I think one of my own tendencies is to, people talk about spiritual bypassing. There's certainly intellectual bypassing as well. Yeah, I mean, part of it is I wanna, you know, Will, you're talking about plot points and narrative, and that whole piece that Don Kalshed likes to use is the full quote is, "Let your heart break and drop the story." And my work, my personal work through this, at least as it's coming to me as I live into this experience, living in a very confined space, is it's about increasing the capacity to feel. And if trauma is an injury to the capacity to feel, how the work of recovery is, how long can I stay in the dark? How long can I abide with the shadow without trying to create some sort of intellectual manipulation or a way to control?
Mm-hmm.
And for me, that's the real work. Like, it's very easy to intellectualize shadow as a way to defend against and not have to actually let my heart break to experience the tremendous loss and devastation, not just of this, what's happening right now, but of the incredible natural disasters and environmental loss that's happening at such a pace that it's impossible to metabolize. I cried today for an hour and I didn't even know why. Like, it wasn't because I was particularly lonely. I couldn't identify the feeling. It was this incredible, deep upwelling of grief. Almost, I know a lot of us buy into this concept, but it's almost as if the world had a soul. And I think that's it. Like, if we really want to talk about emergence, emergence doesn't come from a theory. Emergence comes from a field, you know, and a field is created by human beings. And in this instance, I think it's whatever is the next, whatever is the emergence, I think it's going to come from the tremendous amount of suffering. And people don't get clean from alcohol and drug addiction by thinking their way through it. You know, people get clean by hitting bottom. And that seems to be, you want to call it a myth of our time, it might be hitting bottom.
I would suggest that's the plot point.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very moved by what you said about getting rid of one's story and allowing one's heart to break. Because what for me, it makes me think of Lionel Corbett and the notion of suffering, and how suffering, if you look at the word etymologically, Ferrare means both to carry a burden and to find a treasure. So I think what's so significant about what you said is that in order for us to get to this other side, to what you call a transformation, et cetera, a change of consciousness, it really depends on our ability to suffer productively, right? And that's easier said than done. And you're right, it very much is a embodied experience that the intellect may point toward but can never capture. And that's important for me because starting Monday, I'm teaching 60 students, and all of them, I've already told them that I want this to be a communal experience, not merely an educational one. So hearing you talk about this opens me up to understand the Yoruba, the largest ethnic group in Africa. What that word really means is to sacrifice, to make holy. So how do we make the daily notion of staying 6 feet away from one another, cleaning my handles in my car, cleaning the door every other day, how do I make that holy? And to me, it is about experiencing through, not intellectualizing around. So it made me think of Lionel Corbett when you talked about that. And also made me think of James Hillman too. So I appreciate you offering that. And the fact that you cried, I think a lot of what I've been hearing in the department here at the various universities, and in terms of folks who do the kind of work that many of you do, is an unwillingness to surrender.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Even today, the president, earlier today, he said that he knows we'll get to the other side. The Americans want to get back to work. And that is an unwillingness to deal with the shadow.
That's a refusal, not a recognition that the only way out is through. That's the tyrant of the status quo, realizing that the status quo is about to slip right away if they go through, and trying to keep the through from happening, you know? One thing that's really profound to me, you must be experiencing it too, is, you know, I chair a department. So I've got 15 teachers right now that are trying to figure out what to do. And we've just, you know, announced that we're going to go online for starting on Monday. And it's, normally we're all mad at the machine and how it's running and the ways they do things inefficiently. And there's plenty to be mad at, for sure. But everybody's responding in this, like, you know, when you're almost about to be in a car wreck and all of a sudden like infinite consciousness shows up to get you out of it. That's like everybody's bringing the fullness of themselves right now. And I see it with my department, with every teacher, and also with the students. You know, students started making content immediately to share with their community. And so I think that's one of the things that happens is when you get so close to the bottom, that gives you this instinctual reaction that you don't get any other way. And now we're getting this instinctual reaction and this big breath, this big gap, this big, you know, delay of all of the chains and loops that we're normally in, whether it's baseball or the elections or whatever. Everything's on stop and everybody's instincts are up. And you know, a lot of people are afraid that there's going to be no more education in this semester. It's going to be a wasted term of education, but it's very clear to me that students and faculty are learning like some of the biggest lessons of their lives right now, as is our culture. And I think it's exactly what David's saying about feeling. I don't think the chains are that reliable right now, but the threads, the human threads, the emotions, the relationships, the feeling is holding us together when the rest of the stuff is breaking. And for the rest of, you know, my existence, I'll know that those threads are more powerful if the chains ever break.
Mm-hmm.
I was talking to my parents, are Philadelphia Italian Catholics, pretty dyed in the wool, and they were saying about how Catholic Easter services have been canceled in the Diocese of Philadelphia, and I thought to myself, what an profound metaphor, not just about sort of shifting patterns around religion in America, but metaphorically and symbolically, this is not a time to celebrate the resurrection. I mean, it's very, very interesting to hear that.
Yeah.
Hmm.
The two words that seem to resonate everywhere today is cancellation and postponement. And they're, those are two really heavy duty archetypal conditions, if I can phrase it that way. And it brings up, and I'm really bouncing off of many of your comments, what am I willing to cancel? And what am I willing to postpone? And pulling on the serenity prayer of Al-Anon and AA, can I muster the wisdom to know the difference? Yeah.
I think it's really important as we're forming the possibilities of how we want to transform to either reposition the things that have happened or navigate a course coming out of this, that when we look back on this from several years down the road, were we on the right side of the issue? Did we form ourselves appropriately in terms of the measure of response? Did we preserve our nobility? Were we gracious? Were we a part of the healing and the solution, rather than did we exacerbate the problem?
Yeah.
And the thing that strikes me was a talk that Bill Gates gave in 2015, where he talked about this pandemic. And he said, as we were coming out of the Cold War and we had all of this scary stuff going on with nuclear waste and all of that, we prepared and we got rid of a lot of stuff and we had an action plan. He said, the next big thing coming down at us is going to be a pandemic. And this was 2015, in the wake of the Ebola crisis and all that. And he said, we're completely unprepared for this.
Could you imagine if this was Ebola? I'm sure we all have.
Yeah.
This thing is different, but it has a character of its own that we're still trying to figure out what it is. It knocks you out in a couple of days. These are people who come down with some, they don't lay around and deal with this thing for 2 or 3 weeks. 2 or 3 days comes up and you're gone. And these are fathers and mothers and brothers and sisters and lovers and people who have a human life, who were building out a character in everybody else's life around them. And the loss is just immense. And so, I mean, we want to, as we're moving forward, do it consciously, do it reactively, do it in some way that, I love the wisdom that I'm surrounded with here. This is, if I have any gifts in life, it's like hanging out with cool people who think about the right stuff. So, back to you. What's the story that's coming out of this? This story, we've always been written by the story, the narrative of history and nature. What's being written for us now? What character do we play in this? And what's happening? Why are we having this thing happen?
I was really I was hoping Kieran was going to be here. Saw his name on the list, right?
He was, and he called me about an hour ago and said the pat phrase, something, you can harass him, he'll come. If we do, I would hope that this is not a one-off, that we come up and we do it and it's gone. So
No.
I bring it up because Kieran did a really fantastic talk during the Pacifica had our first ever virtual open house last Friday, and Kieran was the speaker, and he did a piece on archetypal astrology around coronavirus. And it was really fantastic. And it really named a lot of pieces for me around Saturn and Pluto, and the archetypal dimensions of constriction and transformation, and the descent and the underworld piece. And he really, I feel like at a very deep energetic level, really named a lot of at least what I've been personally experiencing, and maybe some of the wider societal dimensions around that dance. And Will named Rick Tarnas's work, and Rick Tarnas's Cosmos and Psyche does this whole piece where he traces Saturn and Pluto cycles, and we're in another one right now. And this is exactly, it's crazy to see, but it's like it's exactly as he's described it around these different energies. I mean, here we are completely constricted, completely constrained in that world of Saturn, and our own monastic ascetic disciplines that we're being forced into. And then the Pluto piece about the infection and invasion from something that is hidden. And like Dennis was saying earlier, like this whole piece around the invisibility of being penetrated by something that is relatively unconscious, that all we can do is obsessively wash our hands to try to keep ourselves sort of clean or free or away from. And it's a killer. It's a killer combo. I mean, those aspects, killer combo. Not sure if others are into that world or sort of speak that.
Is that recorded somewhere?
Yeah, it was recorded.
Where can we see it?
I
don't know.
I can recommend another talk actually on the same topic, because I do speak this language, David, and I have some good friends who are archetypal astrologers looking at the broad picture, not the personal astrology. There's a recent podcast published through astrologyuniversity.com.
Lawrence Hillman's, yeah, that's great.
Yeah, Lawrence is speaking on that. He's going to let me know about that. But if you speak to any of the astrologers who are paying attention at the cultural level, more at the cosmic level, they will speak about these large forces, which is this combination of Pluto and Saturn. And Lawrence uses the metaphor of Pluto being a meat grinder. Whenever you're going through a Pluto transit, something is happening in your own life that involves Pluto, it goes through a meat grinder. It's just completely ground down. It's taken apart. And so kind of the idea is that the slower planet, in this case Pluto, sort of leads the dance with the faster planet, which in this case is Saturn. And so Saturn, which refers to the Senex, it refers to all of our structures, our rules, our policies, the way things have always been. That's being basically shoved into this meat grinder, and we're seeing things fall apart. And I'm not at all surprised to hear about the grief that you experienced today, David. And I think grief is one of the emotions that I notice many people are feeling when they can sort of move beyond the anxiety. They seem to drop into the grief.
I'm going to try to find that link right now, share it with everybody, the podcast that Elizabeth's talking about.
It's interesting, though. I don't know if anyone else has an experience of this. I happen to actually be immune compromised. So it's an interesting piece of interacting with people in the world right now, that I'm very consciously not masking and gloving up. I'm allowing myself to be mindful and careful, but I also feel like there's a piece of me that wants to maintain that human connection. And so I'm feeling the interesting piece of our different responses bodily to engagement, and how every once in a while I can feel like there's a moment where I'm deciding, is this safe for me, or am I endangering myself? And is my heart big enough to carry the fear with the danger? And is it worth it? And I'm choosing specifically different kinds of interactions and where I do and don't engage in order to try and mind that and balance it out, so that I do enough connecting and I'm not living interactions from a place of fear. So I thought that was interesting, David, what you were saying.
Did we lose Dennis?
Yeah, I don't see Dennis. I'm sure I'll call back in.
Yeah, I think Dennis left. Yeah.
You know, to the point on Saturn, I always associate Saturn with the kind of tyrant of the status quo from that and all this, you know. So if you put, there's Dennis. So if you put this into, you know, a model like the hero's journey, it's pretty clear, you know, where you start with the status quo, the world as it was before some major disruptive event, Saturnian tyrant maintaining the status quo. Some sort of repressed invisible disruption disrupts it and triggers a cycle of transformation. So it's really interesting to me. I don't know much about this astrological stuff. I'm interested mythologically in Saturn and connect him with a key role in our culture. That's very interesting to hear that there's such movement on that on that front, especially, you know, with with Pluto. Yeah, the invisible killer, as Trump keeps calling him, right? Crazy.
I think the other thing that's important to remember, though, about Saturn often gets a bad rap. But Saturn is also the structure that allows us to create anything at all. The kind of discipline that we bring to our lives as creative people, painters or writers or sculptors, teachers, you know, all of the various forms of creativity. So as much as I'm watching this dance between Pluto and Saturn and watching the structures come under attack or dissolve, the invisible killer, so to speak, I also really think it's a wonderful time for anybody who's creative to rethink our commitments, the commitments that we make to the work that we're doing in the world. I think that too is Saturn.
I couldn't agree more. And just to respond to that directly, I think the process of transformation is normally one where Saturn has become too rigid, too constricting. That element of the structure needs deconstruction, needs breakdown, needs reevaluated, but absolutely also needs, you know, rebuilt in a new paradigm. And I think that we're all going to be shocked, or maybe we're not, because we kind of all feel it. It's just how different the structures are going to start looking after all this.
Well, like this structure right here.
Yeah. Yeah.
This marvelous structure that Dana invited us into. Thank you, Dana.
I can't tell you how relevant everything that we're talking about and that we're experiencing seems to me. And I'm extremely touched. I can't say enough. I mean, it's just, we need something that's going to bring us together in some sort of way that we can effectively marshal our psychic resources to put some windows in these walls that we see happening around. There are concrete structures that people are intending to build, and we need to tear down those walls.
Hi, this is Greg. I want to echo my appreciation for this conversation. It's like breathing air after being on Twitter or wherever. So thank you for that. I've been thinking about monsters, and I don't know if you know Jeffrey Jerome Cohen's piece, Monster Culture. So,
we have a 10th person.
Oh, okay. Anyway,
That come from?
I can make it available in the chat if you want, but it's always struck me as being really powerful. Here are just a few of them. The monster's body is a cultural body. The monster always escapes. And then the monster is the harbinger of the category crisis, which is what we've all been talking about. And then my favorite is, and the one that I'm kind of dwelling in right now, is that the monster dwells at the threshold of becoming, which is, I hear echoed in your eloquent statements. I've also been thinking about Castaway, because I'm always thinking about Castaway and how we've been tossed up on this island, and things are going to come to us, and they're going to look like the old things, like a VHS tape or something, or a party dress. And we're going to have to make a fishing net out of that, or some lashings for a raft. And Will's comment about epics and gathering what we have, what we want to take into the next world, really struck a chord with me. Because I want to recognize that maybe there's nothing left to take. Maybe we just have to repurpose the things that come to us. Because what happens, if you remember, is he does return, he does get off the island, but nothing's ever the same. Kelly's married their dentist, you know, and his memory of Kelly is all that kept him going. He comes back and she's married to the dentist. And the last scene is him at a crossroads. So I've been thinking about that a lot. I've also been thinking about the golden ass, because, you know, the ancient Roman story, and the only virtue this guy has is that he keeps going. That's his only virtue. He doesn't have high-minded thoughts. He just has low-minded thoughts. That's how he became an ass. But he just keeps going. By the end, just because he keeps going, not by any virtue or any special choice, he becomes a priest of Isis.
I have some good thoughts that, as we're winding up to perhaps the end of the hour, that there were various comments that people brought out there, and people were chatting and saying, well, what was that, or where is this, or what was that book? If you would email me something that you referenced, Dennis, you brought up those two books.
Yeah.
I'll collect these, and then I'll disseminate them, you know, to the group, and you can do with them then whatever you feel like doing, but at least you have them and what have you. If it was a website, or if it was some thought or some reflection, or maybe you have a reflection based on this and something comes up, because sometimes with writing and purging our minds is a private experience and not a public experience. I do much better when everybody goes home and I can write, and than I do trying to be eloquent, you know, in the heat of the moment. That's always been a challenge. And so we can collect these, and maybe, you know, maybe we are a group. Maybe we are on a spaceship going somewhere forward. And I can bring this up and propose that, you know, maybe we would like to do this again sometime. Or maybe we'll want to add a few people or do something. I don't know. When Will and I began the Myth Salon 4 years ago, we didn't know what it was going to become. I mean, if he'd have said no, it wouldn't have been. So it took a community of 2 to build 4, to build 10, to, you know, to order the symmetry and the synergy into a form that it became useful. And look over the past 4 years, all of the people who have driven from miles and come here. Boris drives all the way in here now from Riverside to come here for a couple hours. That's a long way. You know, I mean, that's an amazing journey. And what do I offer? I couldn't tell you. You know, I know what I get out of his presence and these things happening in my home. I love what it is that we're able to create by tapping into this thing that we call community. And that's the very thing that is being driven apart, because on one hand, we have the community, but we have a myth of a separate self that is driving us back to that separate self. We're supposed to be apart from one another right now for our own healing and well-being. I yearn to come back to something collective, and not a virtual collectivity, but something where we can hug one another and be in the same room and do that. But we've really got some rites of passage to go through before we get to that point.
Right.
And I'm not sure what those are, but coming together this way seems to be a plausible entry point.
Speaking of not sure, I'll just say I'm like an intelligence sponge. I feel like the world is so all over the place that I feel like I need to figure it out like really quickly. And I can only ask the questions I can think of. And I'm definitely researching the heck out of those. But just talking with y'all, there are a whole set of questions I hadn't thought about yet. And, this is a time that, I've also opened up text threads with other Pacifica Myth grads, just saying, hey, let's share intelligence. Like, let's figure out together what the heck is going on. And so, to your call for maybe a future meeting, that's something that would be so valuable to me from my point of view. I can't get enough of other people's questions and perspectives, their minds and their hearts and their feelings and every hermeneutic that they bring with their fullness. So I would love to hear from you guys again.
So Dana, I wonder if you could put out to us a couple of tentative dates to sign on for a second round.
Well, let me ask you this, Dennis, because Dennis is a morning person. He would be in bed right now, but for us. He took
hours ago.
Took a nap this afternoon so he could come here and be with us. So
well worth it. Well worth
Thank you, Dennis.
But maybe we could do this like in the morning sometime. We're all, it could be.
Yes.
We could move the time around and we could figure out, it doesn't have to be. And I'm open to suggestions because
when am I going to drink my bourbon, Dana?
In the morning.
I'm like the tail on the dog. I'm just going wherever the dog goes.
Well, that's Dana. That's a great way that technology liberates us to float around the clock. And but anyhow, this is worth it whether we do it in the evening or the morning. I'm 2 hours ahead of you all out in California, but no, we'll name the time and then I'll show up.
Or take a nap.
Or take a nap, but before.
Dana, just a suggestion. Since you've cultivated this list of people in the community that you've built over 4 years, how many years have you been doing the Myth Salon?
4 years.
I think you said 4.
So you have this list, this email list. Why not send out the Zoom link and open it up and do a community-wide call and see what's going on with people?
Well, we're going to do the next Myth Salon with Christopher Vogler on April 9th. And we're going to figure out how to do it and what a Myth Salon would be. The difference between a Myth Salon in my family room or living room and this is that I see 9 faces here and we can all kind of like talk and get interaction going. My fear is like my wife's yoga class. She goes to yoga and she'll have 10 or 15 people in the class. They're now online. They get 90 people showing up on this thing. If I send out to my 300 and some odd Myth Salon list,
Plus
I can have 150 people showing up.
Yeah.
Which changes the dynamic. It doesn't devalue what it is that we're doing, but it certainly changes the interactive part of what it is. And
I'm sorry.
one of the shadow parts of this that I was thinking about how to do it. There's a real potential for a split between the haves and the have-nots during this period that really is very concerning to me. And one of the haves has to do with access to the perspectives that heal. And what we're talking about with this is kind of an elite way that we can sit around and we can talk and we can brainstorm this thing and come up with these great perspectives and all of that. That changes when you put 150 or 200 people in a forum.
Yeah.
It's just different.
But you are still planning on doing myth salons remotely. Did I hear you say that?
We're going to try it on April 9th. Chris Vogler has consented.
Great.
Yeah, this is new territory for me, David. I am less than technologically skilled. I'm arguably I think I'm the oldest in this crowd.
And you set up this Zoom call.
I'm way beyond my years, and my arena of productivity is challenged at best. But I'm just trying to swim with the best, and I'm like, look at this. I'm really honored by this crowd. So I think what we ought to do is keep it alive with my email list that I have with you all. If we want to expand this beyond this, you can probably have a few more people in a session like this and it still works. But you can't double it. I don't think you can do 20.
No.
I think for right now, excuse me, I'm off of the Myth Salon. For right now, I'd like the group to stay exactly as it is. I don't even know what it is, but I'm so so moved by it. To start adding is exactly what I don't want to happen. For me,
this group.
There's a book called Parable of the Sower by Octavia Butler, where she kind of predicts this sort of thing.
Yes.
And what I like about this group and what I like about you, Dana, you're too humble to say it, but what you do is plant seeds. So let's group continue to make, plant seeds, and then we'll see what happens. But right now, I like what's going on with this group. And it's not because I agree with everything. It's like, wow, you're making me like the astrology. I'm like, oh my goodness, I got to think about this, because initially I would dismiss it. But I like that about this group. So again, in here, I hope we can kind of keep it what we're doing. I like the zeitgeist. I like the spirit. And then later on, if we all decide to change, then we certainly can do that.
Well, we really don't have an alternative until there's a new landscape of human behavior in front of us. We're trying to figure out the architecture of the life raft that we're out on a storm.
That's
right.
Yeah.
This is
Station 5. Just kidding.
There can be 10 of us.
Mm-hmm.
I have another call scheduled for 8, so I actually have to go. But I just wanted to thank everybody. It's really, really good to be in this community tonight. Nice to see new friends and colleagues that I haven't seen in too long.
Wonderful. So
thanks, David.
Good to see you, David.
Filter this thing away, and we'll close this out. You'll be hearing from me.
Great. And we'll send you names and book titles and things like that.
Yeah, whatever you brought up and mentioned, and hang in there down in Texas.
Yep. And you as well, and all of you.
All of you.
It was
Good to see you, Dennis.
Take
care,
pleasure,
Elizabeth.
Really enjoyed it.
Yeah, Dana, thank you very much.
Thank you, Dana.
Nice to see you, meet you.
Dana.
Yep.
Yes.
And both here and in the Myth Salon, you're on 2 different lists, and so we'll talk about them separately. But this has been, I would say, this has been very productive.
Very
wonderful.
Very good launch. A very good launch.
Very good
For an idea that we didn't know which way it was going to go. You know, as the Cheshire Cat says, if you don't know where you're going, any path will get you there.